Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is having sexual thoughts, so called bad thoughts, in your mind, in your heart, thinking about somebody in an overtly sexual way, or generally having an outlook in day-to-day routine, in day-to-day life, which is predominantly sexual in nature. Is it haram in Islam? It's a pertinent question that is asked many a times by the youth. And pornography and all of those things heavily feature in the backdrop of this question. So let's deal with it. This question normally is not dealt with, in my humble opinion, in detail by most of the religious scholars. So I just want to briefly hint at some of the aspects that it encapsulates. So please join me and let's do this, yeah? Bismillah. It would be extremely important that I give you some background to today's podcast. I was recently invited into a meeting between a bride and a groom that fell into marital quarrel. In my society in Pakistan, for those of you who aren't from here, it is usually thought best, before things reach their extreme in a marital relationship, to gather around the family of both bride and groom and have a chat, try and work out the issues that the couple is having, or the issues because of which the marriage is about to be broken. And so it was a meeting of that sort. Excuse me. And I was invited to it from the groom's side. And one of the things that came up, in fact, this was one of the pivotal things, because a lot of people have been asking me. I've had this conversation with a lot of people over this past week. I've discussed this with a lot of people, and they've been asking me why suddenly you are talking about these things, or why you are talking specifically about the concept of sexuality vis-a-vis Islamic Sharia law. And this is the reason, because I've been to that meeting and I saw some of the things that actually didn't really make sense to me. One of the things that came up in that meeting was that, primarily the groom wanted to get married again, have a second marriage, and he was proposing a separation. And the bride's family, they were quite angry and enraged. And so in the meeting, the thing that came up, the groom, he blatantly said that he's sexually frustrated. It has been a sexless marriage for a year or so, for over a year, which is a long time for a man. For a woman, maybe not so much. And I don't want to be sexist. I'm just plainly stating a mere fact. But for a man, it's a long time to live without sex, per se. And so he said, the wife, her normal narrative is she does a job. I'm a businessman. Her normal narrative is that she would decline my approach every night and say that she's been caught up. They had 2 children. They have 2 children, by the way. She's been caught up in the household chores, or she's been caught up at job, and she's mentally and physically drained, and she isn't well. She isn't feeling up to it. She doesn't want it. And I'm sorry. The main thing that I was astonished about, and the main reason for me making today's video, is that the bride's family, they turned around and they said this is toxic masculinity, that the man is leaving a woman just because of sexual frustration, because everything else is working perfectly. She's taking care of the children, she's taking care of the household, the system, she's managing it well, she's doing everything else, but the only thing that she is declining are the approaches, the sexual approaches at night. And so basing this whole thing, it was, their narrative, that basing this separation thing and the second marriage thing solely on sexual frustration is toxic masculinity. This guy is of sick mentality. This guy who's proposing this is of sick mentality. He is overtly sexual, and this is shameful, and this is toxic masculinity. I mean, wanting sex from your wife, I mean, for real? Is that really toxic masculinity? Having sexual thoughts about your wife? Is that toxic masculinity? There are things which are absolute and there are things which are relative, right? So religion for us, for Muslims, is an absolute, and things that have been taught to us by religion are absolutes. If you study the Quran and the Hadith well, you'll get to know that primarily a man has two obligations in marriage primarily, and those are the two main obligations. The woman has two obligations. I'm sorry. الرجال قوامون على النساء. And this is, by the way, a general decree. Even before marriage, the men are responsible for women. They safeguard the women. They are responsible for the well-being of the women in their household. So الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا. And the second obligation is nafaqah. The second obligation of a man, especially in a marital relationship, is, although again this is general, a son has this obligation towards mother if the father has passed away. A brother has this obligation to the sister if the sister's husband has passed away and the father has passed away. So the second thing is the financial responsibility. A man has to take care of that. And especially in marital relationship, a wife is 100% dependent for both of these things on the man. On the other hand, a woman in marriage has two obligations. First is upbringing of the children, delivering, getting pregnant with children. That's one of the obligations of marriage in Islam. A childless marriage is not really considered a marriage in Islam. Islamic marriage is not solely for sex. It is for that, and I'm coming to it, but it's not solely for sex. The real hikmah, the real wisdom behind this is to institutionalize family and protect it. Protect the institution of family. That's what marriage is all about in Islam. And so the first obligation of the woman in Islam is, in a marital relationship, is to upbring the children, the better upbringing of children. And there are differences of opinion amongst the fuqaha as to which age it is an absolute obligation of the woman to take care of the child. And roughly the consensus is on the preteen age, like 11 or 12. But that's a separate issue. We can talk about the nitty-gritties. The point is that that is the first obligation of the wife. Her second obligation is sexual satisfaction of husband. That is an absolute. It is in the hadith, it is in the Quran. Hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lahunna. What does that mean? That includes sex. I'm sorry. There is the hadith, very famous hadith, which is often misquoted and misused, in which the Prophet ﷺ has said, and this is Sahih hadith. In fact, it is of such a degree of authentication that it cannot be negated. That if a husband calls the wife on his bed for a sexual act, if she declines and the husband is angry with her, the malaika, the angels, would curse her all night till dawn for this. Can the man indulge into a marital rape? Can he force her into sex? No. But what does this hadith say? That the woman, without a proper mutahaqqiq, valid reason, shouldn't say no to her husband. And so these are the two obligations of man and the two obligations of the woman. I'm sorry. If you take any of these out of the equation, there would be a disbalance. No, a woman is not liable for her husband's clothes, washing, ironing, cooking. No, that's none of her obligations in Islam. So please clear that in your mind. Now the point is, wanting sex from your wife, is that perversion? How has this whole thing been turned upside down by the woke movement, and the latest LGBTQ plus narrative is really beyond astonishing. So what do you want to say exactly? That having sexual thoughts about other women, about women who are outside your relationship of marriage, porn actresses, porn stars, butt models, bikini models, swimwear models, having thoughts about them, that's all right. But having those thoughts about your own woman, about your wife, about your better half, is toxic masculinity? I mean, really, I'm astonished beyond belief. I really am. And so when the narrative began about, the woman is doing everything else, but just because she's not fulfilling one of her duties, which is sexual gratification, why does the man? Oh, it is an absolute, bhai. This is an absolute. Other things are all relative. If she's cooking for her husband, that's not obligatory in Islam. If she's washing his clothes, again, not an obligation in Islam. What is an absolute obligation in Islam is sexual gratification. If she is not fulfilling an absolute, no matter what else she is doing, Islamically speaking, a man cannot be held responsible for going that route. What would you want that man to do? To have an extramarital relationship? To commit adultery? Penalty for which is death? I mean, really, what would you want the man to do? And so it's a very strange business. And now thoughts, sexual thoughts. If you're having sexual thoughts about your wife, I mean, is there anything wrong with it? I'm sorry, no. But obviously, one of the things that comes under heavy scrutiny, and one should talk about this, especially with youngsters, is the effects of pornography, the effects of general lack of modesty in the society world over, has affected many brains, most of the brains, right? And now you have an easy access to all of this through internet, through your cell phone. It used to be, in our times before us, that if you wanted to go down that path, if you wanted to watch pornography, you wanted to watch nudes of women, and so on and so forth, you had to go through a lot of struggle, a lot of strife. Nowadays, you have everything on your cell phone. And the youngsters, young children, have access to it. And if you think that they haven't, like your 8-year-olds, your 10-year-olds, my 10-year-old, if you think they haven't yet seen these things which are out there, well, you're being naive. So you really need to sit them down and talk to them. And this is where the whole thing begins, where the whole problem arises from. When you are into watching other women nude, when you're into watching other people committing sexual acts, when you're into watching pornography, you have, you have a certain kind of a mindset. You have a certain kind of a sexual outlook. That's called porn addiction. And that hurts the brain on many levels, because if you are addicted to that kind of a dopamine hit, and what I mean by that is when you indulge into these acts, what's happening is, why you are addicted to these acts, because your mind is releasing a chemical which is making you extremely happy. That chemical is called dopamine. This is what caffeine releases in your mind, also adrenaline a bit, and in your bloodstream. That's, I think, released by your kidneys, I guess. I'm forgetting exactly. And nicotine. Nicotine is in fact, nicotine is the most addictive drug known to mankind. The most. Forget fentanyl, forget, mushrooms, forget LSD, forget acid, forget all of that. Forget the psychedelics, forget the methamphetamines. Nicotine is hands down, the most addictive drug known to mankind. Why? Because it releases that amount of dopamine and releases it so fast that no other drug comes even close to it in that regard. And so when you're into this, when you're into pornography, when you're thinking about women all day long, when you have unclean thoughts, when you have sexual thoughts, what's happening is you're constantly looking for that hit. You're constantly looking for that dopamine hit. You're constantly looking for that kind of an occupation, mentally and psychologically. And so when it becomes real, oftentimes for youngsters, it's very earth-shaking and they can't adjust. And in marital relationship, especially if you have been a porn addict, you're still a porn addict when you get married, and it's very difficult to reach that high with your wife normally, because she'd be from a good family. She's not into acts, the kind of things that you've been seeing on your screen, on your cell phone. And so that hurts the mentality and psychology on different levels. However, I'm sorry. However, having sexual thoughts about your wife, wanting sex from your wife, it's not a sin, it's not bad, it's not toxic masculinity. If you're wanting her to do unlawful deeds for you, if you're wanting her to do some of the stuff that you've seen in porn, of course, yeah. Of course, you're at the wrong here. You could go to jail for that, and you should. But wanting sex from your wife, is that really toxic masculinity? Is that really a perversion? Is that really a perversion of man? No, not really, no. I reject this narrative. No matter how strong an argument you have for it, you don't have a strong enough argument for it. So it is by default rejected. And so let us conclude this now. Having a general outlook of sexuality, of overtly sexual psychology is definitely wrong. The Sharia law of Islam does not apply to thoughts, although. Just keep that in mind. No matter how bad a thought you have in your mind, the Sharia law cannot apply to it because it's your mind that you're having that thought. But remember that thoughts are, at the end of the day, translate into actions. So the kind of thoughts you're gonna have in your day-to-day normal routine in your life, that is what is going to affect your psychological makeup and your practicality, your practical approach. So it's definitely a very bad thing. You should avoid porn at all costs. You should avoid all these bad thoughts at all costs. The best thing is to stay in ablution, in wudu, try and recite the Quran, and all the time, whenever you're free, and 5 times of prayer. These are the best remedies to this problem. But having sexual thoughts for your wife, that's actually commendable, I guess, in Islam. You should have sexual thoughts for your wife only, not anyone else. This is not toxic masculinity. Men and women, sex is a need for both. It's not just men. It's a biological need, and it should be fulfilled by the husband and wife for each other. And without it, the marriage cannot be sustained. I think you should go and watch some of the videos by Sheikh Umar Baloch. He has an excellent series on marriage, and he's definitely much more learned than I am, much more experienced than I am, and you'd learn a lot from him, inshallah, on this subject. But just again to reiterate, toxic masculinity, this term has been abused in today's world, and without any sound arguments. That's the astonishing thing. So, I don't know what the world is coming down to. I mean, what do you want a man to do? You want a man to marry a woman and then have sexual relationships with everyone other than the wife? Everyone but the wife? You want him to have sex with everyone else but the wife? Because having sex with the wife, wanting sex from wife is toxic masculinity? Come on. That has to be a new type of high for my so-called woke friends. All right, then I'll leave you with it. Take care of yourselves, your family, and everyone around you. Till the next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.